I'm going to walk you through today some of the enhancements that are forthcoming in the next version of Visual Studio, codenamed 11. I try to keep this session more demo-driven, as interactive as possible. But on your side, I'm hoping that you have loaded yourself up with your choice of beverages so that you don't kind of feel dizzy. All right, so let's get started. Okay. So as I said, I'm not a very big fan of PowerPoint slide decks. So we'll start with a demo, and we'll walk through a lot of the enhancements that are in place in Visual Studio, keeping the community feedback in mind. One thing Microsoft does very nice is, it kind of puts its attention towards the developer community and takes the feedback very seriously. So a lot of the features that you'd see today here are based on some of the feedback that we as a community has given over a period of time and again to Microsoft, and they've done a good job. They've done a good job of incorporating some of them in the forthcoming version of Visual Studio. So I don't know how much time I'll get, but I have a lot to cover. So please pay attention and bear with me as I kind of briefly talk about some of the new features. So let's switch to a demo. The first thing that we're going to talk about is some of the productivity enhancements that have been made in the IDE. Let's switch to the demo while I talk about it. So I hope you're able to see my screen. Okay, cool. And the solution that I'm using for the demo today is available for download from Brian Keller's blog. So if you're interested, want to explore more about the features that I'm going to talk about today, you can download the solution and the virtual machine from the blog and then use them. All right. So as developers, one of the major pain points that we see time and again is our ability to locate code and navigate through code, right? You might have, in an enterprise scale, number of projects could easily spawn up to more than 100, 200 projects as your application grows. And for new members joining in the project teams, it really becomes difficult for them to actually find code and navigate through code, right? So to start with, let's take a look at some of the enhancements that are in the Solution Explorer in order for you to be more productive as a developer. And just so that you know, most of the items that I talk about today, you'd kind of feel that, well, they are not major changes, but all these little changes add up over a period of time and then help enhance the productivity of the developer as a whole, right? So all these changes are minor nitty-gritty changes, but then they are of real value. And I really hope that you'd appreciate some of the changes that are coming in. So if you look at this, and I don't know, I'm not a very big fan of this gray look in the Visual Studio. I kind of like the colorful version far more better. So I hope Microsoft takes that feedback as well and does something about it. But nevertheless, it's pretty easy to navigate code and find stuff. And if you love the black and white feel, you'd probably love this IDE as well. All right. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about, and this is a nice change in terms of the ability to look through code, is if you say explore, I'm going to explore the fabricamfiber.web project. I'm expanding the controllers. And I'm going to click on one of the files. One nice thing that you just saw is I have just made a single click here. It's not a double click. And the moment I clicked on it, a preview appeared for that particular file. So often what happens is that our IDE gets cluttered over a period of time, right? We keep opening files, and then we get lost from where we started. And we have to again, go click on the extended drop down and find out, oh, that was the file we were working on. So what you can do here is you can have previews of all different files while you're working on a particular file. So as you click on files, you notice that the preview will get replaced. So as I'm looking at different files, my previews are getting replaced. And there is a small button which is called as the promote preview. So if you think something is of your interest in a particular file and you need that file pinned down, so what you can do is click on that promote preview button and you notice that the file gets pinned down there, right? And if you really need it to stay there for long while you are looking through other pieces of code, you could actually pin it and it will stay there while you look through the other files, right? And they are kind of on the right hand side where you can navigate the preview. Again, it's a small change but adds up. Another nice feature, and of course this field is carried out across. So if you are debugging, for example, right, often you kind of move through different set of files and they keep opening and cluttering your IDE a lot. So what will happen now is if you're debugging and stepping through your breakpoints, they would actually open up in this preview mode. And if you really need to pin one file down, you'll have to actually do a promote preview for you to be able to having that file fixed to the IDE while you are debugging. So a nice change there. Okay, the part I'm very excited about here is few things. In this particular IDE, often if you're ending up working through a lot of projects, you tend to get lost in the scope of where you are in terms of the navigation, right? So a very nice feature that they have added is actually to limit the scope. If you notice, the Solution Explorer is a little different from how it used to be before. You have small navigational elements that can, take you back and forth in how you're browsing code. So if you look at this, I right click on this particular file, and what I'm going to do is say scope to this. So if you click on that scope to this, only that particular file and its relevant elements are displayed in the particular scope. And if you want to navigate back to where you were, you can actually click on the back button here and go back to your original scope where you were in. This is hierarchical. You can not just do this to a particular file level, you can do it top down. So if you want, you could do it to a particular project. I may say that I just want to limit the scope to this particular project. Your Solution Explorer automatically adjusts that for you, right? The next very nice feature, and I really love this, is earlier you had your view files, you had the code behind files, and at most you probably had the designer, right? You really didn't have a way from the Solution Explorer to find out what artifacts within a particular file you are looking at. So this is the wow thing. If I expand that particular file, you would now notice that it expands into the class, and then it further expands into the dependent artifacts that the class comprises of, being it the properties or the methods that it possesses, right? Very nice thing. And as you browse through each of them, you'll notice that they get highlighted, right? The piece of code that you're browsing on your Solution Explorer, the artifact gets highlighted in your preview mode. So you actually know where you are, and you don't have to really scroll down to that particular piece of code in order to view it, right? Again, as I'm speaking, I'm really hoping that you feel these smaller changes as developers. You feel the pain that you endure on your day-to-day job, right? And hopefully some of these features would be useful to you. All right, another nice cool thing. Now you have the class, right? Do you see what it did? It went ahead and found out where all are the places where the instances of that particular controller is being used. So it's actually now scoped it in a fashion that you can find the dependencies, all the places where it's being used as, right? Another nice feature, you can directly go and find out the piece of code that's using that original block, and then you can go navigate back and forth between where you originally were and limit your scope to what you want. Another nice thing about the Solution Explorer, and this is true to all the elements within the IDE, is that you have a potential of putting together a new window. So it can open up in a new window. The IDE elements themselves are dockable outside of Visual Studio. So if I had dragged and dropped the Solution Explorer like this, taken it out and maximized it, I really can't show you right now, but because I don't have a dual monitor, but if you had, oops, let's go back to where we were, right? If I drag it out, and if I maximize, it opens up in its own window. And if I had a dual monitor, I could have shown you that it actually extends outside of Visual Studio. So you can leverage the dual monitor features, right? Often if you're plugged into a monitor besides your laptop and you want to have a separate view of certain elements of the IDE, you can drag it outside your laptop and put it in the monitor that you're using to do your work, right? Expedite your work, rather. All right. So let's put it back to where it was. Okay, so these are some of the nice enhancements within the Solution Explorer. Another thing, and it's interesting the way Microsoft does it, is often it kind of figures out the most popular third-party tools that are out there and tries to make it part of the main IDE. How many of you have been using PowerToys for Visual Studio? Right? Okay, so we all love the PowerToys. They're a nice way of arranging your code and expanding, collapsing. You don't need any more if you've seen the IDE. You have the collapse all button right here, and you can click it to just collapse your solution structure, and you have a collapse structure, and then you can navigate easily. Okay. The next thing that I'm going to talk about is the ability to search. Now, Microsoft also identified that other than the navigational aspects, you would, say for example, if you're a new dev, right, you would always need some information to be able to find code within your solution structure. It's not necessarily that you're aware of where the location is. You often have to expand, collapse, and go through each individual project to find the piece of code that you're looking for. What you can do here is instead do a search right off the Solution Explorer, right? You can search for the elements. It would not just search in the file names, but it would also go ahead and search within the artifacts inside your file names. So for example, if I say index, it will find you the files that probably have names starting with index. It would also find you the artifacts. If you look at, those are the methods index, right, inheriting from the action results, view results, etc. So it would actually find you within your source file where exactly that code block exists, right? So it does deep search. Search is extremely omnipresent here. It's not just the Solution Explorer. Search is everywhere within the IDE. If you notice, even the quick launch, there is a quick launch bar added on top. So if you're looking for some navigational elements within the IDE itself, you can use the quick launch bar to locate and go to that particular element. For example, if I'm looking for workspaces, it will go and find out at what path workspaces are located, and it will help you click and find that. There is search everywhere. There is search in the toolbox. You can search for controls. There is search in the error list. You can search for exceptions within the error list. If you've written really bad code and you have a lot of compilation errors, you can search and find out what pieces that you need to fix. The most interesting part, of course, is the search within the Solution Explorer. The part that is interesting is something like this. Can somebody tell me what it did? So it has got a fuzzy logic, right? So yeah, it's a kind of it has the ability to do semantic search. So if you're playing with all sorts of objects and classes in your mind, you probably know the abbreviations or the elements that you're using. Just do a fuzzy logic search on the part elements of the classes or objects that you're looking to find, and it will go and find that for you. So XTC, it kind of understands that it expands into service tickets controller, and it just found that for you, right? So this is the most interesting piece within the Solution Explorer search per se. Okay, what other enhancements? Some of the enhancements I talked about are in terms of file preview. So now you could do file previews, you just saw that, and then promote them and pin them to your IDE. You could do image previews. So if you are using a lot of images, what happens is that as developers, although in your mind you know what image to use, but you get confused with the file names, because often if you're doing TDTRs, a lot of images would be with similar names, just differentiated with an underscore number. And it would be hard for you to find which one to use, right? Instead of spending a lot of time trying to figure out which image to use, you could actually go and preview them here. So if I go to content, and if I go to images, just hover over your mouse, and you can see that it previews the image for you, right? Again, small changes, big impact, right? Okay, so let's head back to the slide and see how far we covered. Okay, so all I have in the slides is summarized notes for you to be able to relate and find out the information when you take a real look at some of the demos, right? So we covered exploring the code structure, searching information, image previews, file previews, pinning frequently accessed files, right, performance enhancements. That's one thing I want to talk about. Now, how many of you are baffled by the fact that you have, say, 300 projects to build? You right click, you set build, and you know that you can grab a cup of coffee, go take a break, you know, it'll keep on spinning the wheel till you come back, right? And it will wait for you to come back. So one interesting thing that they have done in terms of the performance enhancement is, let me actually go back to the original source and say build, and you notice that you're not, the build is continuing here, but you know, you can continue to browse code and find out your information that you're looking forward to, right? So it's an asynchronous thing. A lot of features within the IDE are now asynchronous. It doesn't freeze on you, right? So you can continue doing your work while it performs its task, right? All right. So let's move on to the next tick. Okay. Now I'm going to talk about some of the enhancements that are in the editor, right? Microsoft is also joined the bandwagon and driving a lot of web technologies, right? You must be familiar with the HTML5 umbrella, or the suite of elements that come under the HTML5 umbrella. You have HTML5, CSS3, JavaScript is picking up steam, right? Today, if you're using Visual Studio 2010, you have some elements of productivity if you're doing JavaScript development, or say, for example, HTML development, right? But more often than not, you tend to use a different IDE if you're doing HTML development or even JavaScript development, right? You have a lot of editors that are far more richer than Visual Studio is today. So you tend to use all those editors instead of coming back and using Visual Studio. So Microsoft doesn't really want you to go out and find other tools as customers, of course. It wants you to stay within the Visual Studio IDE. So some of the enhancements that are being in place for Visual Studio 11, and we'll explore some of that. So let me switch to a different project. Let's start with what are the enhancements in terms of JavaScript. So you could do JavaScript debugging. Debugging experience was integrated in 2010 itself. A lot of it, but not very robust debugging. What you couldn't do is actually navigate code in JavaScript. It was not. So you see that it's calling that HTML function. I could do F12, or if I had to show you, right click, go to definition, right? So familiar territory, you do that more often than not with C# or VB or whatever you're using it. You could now do that with JavaScript, right? Another interesting thing, you were calling in functions, but you really didn't know what functions to call in, right? The IntelliSense wasn't updating. So what you can do here right now is hit the dot and say HTML. You see that description here? Right, so it's kind of, the description about the function is again built in. So if you are using the summary tags, if I go to that function provided using the summary tag and the method signatures, right? So you could actually find out the summary information and use the function that you really need to use, right? So these are some of the smaller enhancements in terms of JavaScript. There is a parallel session going on, so I think that session talks a lot about some of the enhancements in terms of web. I'm going to just stick to the enhancements that are part of the IDE. Okay, so let's move on to styles. What's new in styles? So let's go ahead, open up a styles thing. Okay, let's find a tag called main. One of the enhancements that the IDE provides you now is smart indentation. Earlier, your CSS file looked like a flat structure. You really couldn't find out, the hierarchical information within the style sheets, what is getting overridden by what, right? So now you have something called as smart indentation. So if I want to put additional styles on top of main, I would do dot main, say dot div, or say main div, and you would notice that it automatically indented it under the main tab, right? And you could put any element down there. Another interesting thing that it supports is code snippeting. So if I wanted a transform element and you really didn't know what purpose it served, you could just do a tab and it will automatically put the elements for you to just change the values and self-tune and experiment, right? So snippeting is also right now supported. Another interesting thing that is supported is code commenting. So you could just select a block of code and say Control-K, Control-C. It would auto-comment the block of code that you're currently browsing. Okay, another nice thing. How many times a designer would tell you that you haven't got the style right? Right? You haven't got that color right. It is actually a transformed color instead of a deep blue that you're using there. Right? So you often have these conversations with the designer in your team and how you haven't gotten the style right, you have missed one particular element. How do I know the hash of the particular color, right? How do I know the hex value? I have to just pick the color, go to probably MS Paint, put that color in, find the hex value, copy it down, and then put it back in the CSS, right? Well, not anymore. So all you do is just say color. I mean, if you're using the color tag, there you go. So you have a color picker right now built in. You can expand into it, choose the colors that you want to use. Maybe it kind of transforms and it lets you do all that. And the code, the hex value will get auto-generated there, right? So again, as I said, minor, small changes, but then they add up the overall value here, right? Okay, so let's see what's in terms of the editor. Right, so one other thing that I want to talk about is the HTML5 DOM support. So if you open, let's open a file here. Let's open the site.master. Okay. You right now have support for HTML5 document object model. That is the default support. If you want to switch back to HTML4, you could do that from here. You have to just type in HTML4T and say tab. It would revert the support to the older version, but the default support is now HTML5. What that means for you is you could use the elements of HTML5. Say, for example, if you wanted to use audio, you could use the support for audio here, and it would find the element for you. If you're using the old document type, it's not going to find this element for you. And you can hit tab, and it would auto-generate a sample code for you, and you have to just change the property attributes to set the file path. Another interesting thing is in the editor itself, if you're updating the tags, right? And again, this piece of code may not look that appealing, but when you're looking at a rich set of controls and your HTML page is really heavy, this matters. So if you're changing the opening tag of that particular element, notice that the end tag automatically changes, right? So if I do H2, the end tag would automatically update. It would find where the closing tag is, and it would automatically update that for you. And this is valid for all the elements across, irrespective of whether you're using HTML5 or maybe even XML. So it automatically does that for you, right? So this is a IDE enhancement more than a language enhancement. All right. Another thing you can do here is suppose you have built a set of controls and you want to get into a refactoring exercise, right? You have written you've spit out a lot of HTML5 code and a lot of HTML code everywhere in the places, and your architect tells you that I don't like that fact, and you just have to go and find all and replace them as controls, right? You have to reuse, right? You've probably been a lazy developer. You haven't done that initially, so there is an opportunity for you to do it now. Just right-click and say extract to user control. Right? It would automatically extract that into a user control. It would put that in your solution structure, and then it would replace the code in your HTML file automatically. Right? You can do that today. Cool. Am I going too fast? Please feel free to stop me, because there are a lot of features I want to cover. So I just like to snipe through all the features. Another thing you could do is, you see this HTML ASP menu, right? A small snippet opens up there. I just clicked on it. So some of the designer features that were earlier available with the designer, right, are now extended onto the code editor. So now you can see that this was previously only available with the designer, setting the properties, changing a control into its templated structure. Now you can do that from the code editor as well, right? So you can set the properties from here. Okay, and if you are using ASP.NET controls, the fuzzy logic comes into picture again. Say you want to do, say, access data source, right? That's the first thing I can see. You don't have to, earlier you had to type ASP, then colon, then it would actually pop up the list of controls that are available, and then you have to select or type it in, right? What you can do now is just say ADS, right? So if you remember the abbreviations, it would auto-translate them into the particular control that you're looking to find, and you could just hit tab and put an implementation for that particular control. Okay, so I guess we covered a lot of stuff in the editor enhancements. There are a lot more. I have just picked a few things that are probably of interest to you right now. Okay, the next thing that we're going to talk about is sort of enhancements in debugging and the overall application lifecycle management side of the house, right? How many of you have used IntelliTrace in any of your applications? Nobody? Okay, just one person there. Wow. Okay, I was kind of expecting that you're using IntelliTrace a lot in your environment, so it would have been easier to just talk about the enhancements. But think about this scenario. As devs, we often get access to environments, probably a dev environment where the first level of deployment has happened. And if you're really lucky, you would probably get access to a staging environment where often you can put your debug version of the code and find out if there are any problems with the code, right? Never access to stages, prod environments or even pre-prod environments, right? Wouldn't it have been nice if you had some tool that was working in your prod or pre-prod environments that captured the trace as you work through certain activities, and you should be able to transfer those traces back to your Visual Studio and be able to debug. So kind of like going back in time, capturing some of the events that happened historically and be able to debug into them, right? It would have been really nice. Can you do that today? Yes. So let's switch to that demo. I'm going to just close this. Keep it down here. Okay. IntelliTrace earlier was part of Visual Studio Ultimate in 2010 and part of the test suite, right? You could use either Visual Studio Ultimate to capture trace information, or you could use the test suite to capture information using IntelliTrace. Today, it is available as an independent entity. You can download the cabinet file from your MSDN license and use it to capture information or use it to trace your production environment and find that information. I have actually downloaded the cabinet file and extracted it into a folder called as IntelliTrace. Now I'm going to use PowerShell commands to attach the IntelliTrace logging to my ASP.NET worker process or my app pool, and then it's going to sit in silos and kind of going to watch my worker process running and how the application pool is behaving and capture all sorts of trace information, right? So let's see how we do that. So I'm going to fire up PowerShell here. And I kind of like to run in God mode most of the time because, you know, Murphy's law, right? It kind of starts failing at when you need it most. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to load or import the IntelliTrace modules, right? So what I'm going to now do is say import hyphen module, let's say module, and I'm going to copy the path here. Oops. Now what I'm going to do is say start hyphen IntelliTrace collection, and I'm going to specify a particular configuration. So now in IntelliTrace you can do debugging on different types of processes, right? You have to specify, there are different configuration files that where you create to specify what kind of information you want to collect through IntelliTrace. So there are some pre-built configuration files, so I'm just going to specify one of them. First thing that you have to specify is what is the application pool that you want to attach it to. Now to do that, let me first show you what the problem is, right? So I'm running in a production environment. I have a customer portal, so let's just go into the customer portal. Or sorry, the intranet portal. So I have I'm not sure which one it was. No, I think it's the customer portal, right? Okay, so this is the customer portal. I kind of log tickets and find out what's happening with my system, the Fabricam Fiber system. That's the one I'm using for demos. Now, if I click on this particular ticket, you notice that it pops up an error. If it's in my staging environment or dev environment, I could easily debug, attach to the process, or maybe do a remote debug and find out what's the problem. This is my production environment. I really don't know what's going on here, right? How can I capture this information? So what I would do is I'd find out what is my app pool that I want to inspect. So let me open IIS. I hope I have some time. Expand that, find my application pool. So the application pool that is running that particular portal is Fabricam Fiber extranet. I'm going to just go ahead, copy. I believe it's the extranet, yeah. And what I'm going to do here is put that. And then I'm going to specify the log file that I'm going to specify the configuration file that I want to use. So to specify the configuration file, again, I'll go ahead, copy the path. There is a collect default. Oh, I can see it here. Oops. Right. So IntelliTrace is now sitting pretty and started capturing information, right? So now I'm going to go back and browse the portal. I'm just going to say come to the site and hit my error. Really? Did it freeze on me? Is check the status of where your IntelliTrace is. So what you can do is say get IntelliTrace collection status of the particular app pool. So what you have to go is say application pool and give the particular app pool name. Let me, oops. Get hyphen access by IntelliTrace. So I have to stop that first. So I would say stop hyphen IntelliTrace collection, and I'm just going to give yes. Right, so I'm done collecting the information from IntelliTrace. I have collected that, hopefully IntelliTrace has collected that issue that I was encountering in the production system, and let's see if we can debug into it, right? So I'm going to go back and try and open that file again. You see that it gives you a summary of all the information that you collected, and if you scroll down, it's going to give you some of the exceptions that it captured, right? So it was listening to all the events that were fired and all the exceptions that occurred, and you can actually notice that there is a null reference exception. How do I find out where it actually occurred, right? Click on it and say start debugging, right? You don't have to do anything. Visual Studio will take care of attaching it to a particular process in the local so that it fires up and finds the piece of code that might have caused that exception. And if you would notice, it kind of gives you no symbols found. Wow. It should have found, I think I attached the wrong one. So let me stop that. Attach where it started. So the first one. Yep. And if you watch the details here, you notice that this particular code block, the assigned to value is actually set to null. That is what caused the exception. So now it has actually gone in and debugged the piece of code that caused the problem, and now you know where to put the fix in, right? You might haven't checked the exception scenario that the assigned to value could be null, right? Interesting aspects, if you haven't explored IntelliTrace, I would truly recommend. It has matured a lot, and in the forthcoming version, you would have the ability to debug your production scenarios as well, right? Okay, so another important enhancement that has been put in place is in terms of code analysis. Do you do code analysis today? Like static code analysis? Right? If you're still in the older versions, you'd probably be doing fxcop to do some of the code analysis, right? The code analysis itself has enhanced a lot. The thing that I want to talk about here is if you go to your analyze window, there is something called as analyze solution for code clones. So if you click on that, notice that it found out code that is repetitive, right? It kind of found matching clones within your code, the things that are very important for your refactoring exercises, right? So you go in, you run the code clone analysis, you find pieces of code that kind of matched, and you can go ahead and actually go ahead and refactor them. So if I double click these two, you'd notice that there are similar pieces of code that are being highlighted, except for the redirect to action, right? If you notice, only the redirect to action parameter is different, rest of the code is similar. So this is definitely a candidate for your refactoring exercise, right? So again, a nice enhancement that you can work on. So I guess we're running out of time. I actually packed this down with all the demos that I could do, but I think we could finish only till this. Another interesting thing that I would just talk about, and I would let you go ahead and explore, is some of the enhancements that are there in terms of developer collaboration, right? Now the Team Explorer, right, integration with TFS has been enhanced a lot within Visual Studio itself. You could potentially do actions like developer reviews, right? So if you want your piece of code to be reviewed by your peers, you could create a particular task from within Visual Studio Team Explorer itself, go ahead and assign that to your fellow team member, get his feedback, and then complete that particular task. So a lot of enhancements that has gone into Team Explorer. I would suggest or strongly recommend you to go find that from the web and explore some of the enhancements that are part of the Team Explorer suite. All right, so I guess this is so far we could get. Thanks a lot for attending this session. I would stand by for any questions that you might have.